Okay, great. Thank you for that. Sorry about that. Nick, do you want to just carry on where we left off?
Yeah, I was going to say it just relates to what Jamie was saying. That I think it's kind of very easy to. I think that you get this problem in science communication as well. In kind of with every field of science, it's very easy to kind of communicate to the people that are already interested, and kind of do that, and then do some sort of evaluation. You've connected with however many people, they've changed their behavior in some way, and then you've done a great job. But you're kind of missing like great groups of the population. I think that it's kind of that knowns and unknown unknowns thing, who don't know that they don't know about these things, I think sometimes, or even if they do, they're just not really that interested. They have other worries, they have other problems, or they're just not interested at all. I think my PhD project is joint with Chester Zoo, and I think the kind of problem they have at zoos with interpretation is that probably less than 10% of the people that come through the doors will actually read the interpretation, read the signs, and go away having learned something. I think the other 90 or so percent come in for a day out, they walk around for a while and then they leave. And I think it's trying to capture that huge chunk of the population who aren't, haven't started off as interested. I think doing that is the real challenge with communicating with people in science and in conservation and environment and everything else.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Nick. And that was something that I started to look at with projects for the charity I work for, in terms of the engagement programs that we designed for them, in terms of whether you look at quality of engagement versus quantity. You try and go for lots of people, but a very shallow level of engagement, or do you actually focus your engagement on a smaller group of people to take them on a much deeper journey and try and change things? We touched on something there which I might be interesting to talk about, which is something that was in the agenda anyway, but was the different audiences, and particularly underrepresented audiences in conservation. So I know, Jamie, you mentioned some there. And I've been lucky in the projects that I've worked on were specifically targeting what you might call hard to reach audiences, although I don't like that term because I can find them not that difficult to reach. It's just about putting the effort in. So the projects that I worked on were people who were maybe sort of long-term unemployed, had mental health problems, drug and alcohol addiction, learning difficulties, and children with autism. And they weren't very hard to reach, I found. It just took a little bit more time to set things up for them because they have more extra needs that you have to try and make sure that you cater for. But I found that once that I managed to get them outside on the local parks and green spaces, that the impacts, as I said earlier, were amazing, really connected very quickly, and it really changed their behaviours, particularly the autistic children that I worked with who were secondary school age. Their teachers said they noticed quite quickly the changes in behaviour and spending time outdoors, and that was amazing to see. And I think it's something that conservation does need to do a lot more of. It needs to try and reach these audiences, because I think it is true that we can often stay within our own bubble because it's easy and comfortable to work with retired people. But it will make, as Hannah said, I think at the very start, it makes us a bit more relevant if we engage with people that don't engage with us very often. Oh, you're muted.
Just following up from Nick's point. Considering I work in a zoo, and my entire role in my other job there is literally to engage people and to try and ensure people do learn something, hopefully have some sort of behaviour change, because a person is generally much more appealing to talk to than is reading a sign. It does make a difference. I know Chester Zoo has started similar roles under a different name, but it's still a great difficulty to reach everyone, but you do at least reach more people than you would reading signs. In theory, zoos are a really great resource for educating the masses, because the people who go to zoos, and the majority of them aren't us, they're people who've chosen over the beach or the cinema, or as a country walk for a nice day out. They've not gone to learn about conservation, they've gone to have a nice day. So you then got to be really clever about how you get an educational message, particularly one that can potentially be seen as quite doom and gloom. A, to be registered, and B, to create behavior change. There's still a lot of work on that. It's still very new and it's still very difficult. And yeah, so it's a theoretical great place to reach the masses, but practically still quite difficult to get people to learn. And again, it's all about the way that message is framed is the important thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And that's something that comes up a lot in my work in designing projects, like what Nick just said about interpretation. You know, people often want to put an interpretation panel in somewhere. That's quite expensive, and you know, I'm not convinced that they have as big an impact as people think. It's just it's something that you can have the logos on and show what's been done. But I think a lot of people might tend to ignore that you could potentially use that type of money in a different way with a better method. Does anyone else want to contribute? Hannah?
Really enjoying this discussion. I think we're all talking about some things that are quite important to me personally, which is engaging people who really, really aren't engaged already. So in my family, for example, I am really like the only wildlife person. I came to it quite late in life, and the rest of my family don't really understand what it is that I do or why. And I come from a village where everyone's kind of the same. There is no real gardening interest, no real wildlife interest. It's kind of a dry area for that kind of thing. And I was really determined to try and get those people who just don't care at all to just get them out in nature, because I lived in London and didn't do any kind of nature stuff at all, studied loads. And then when I did my wildlife trust traineeship and did my habitat management, it like totally changed my life. And that back to the point of like why we should engage people. It really, really helped me with my mental health, my physical health. Honestly, I would never go back. Like, it was such a big deal for me, and I wanted to share that with other people. And the most successful things that so I set up a wildlife group in the village to try and encourage people to kind of get involved. I felt like there probably were a few people out there who had a slight interest that I could maybe swing into taking part. And the things that got them outdoors the most and got them interested was just having the experience of being able to go outside together and get to know each other and build a little community. And so when it comes to engaging people and what's going to work for them, it's about the experience that you can give them. And I'm not a species expert. I mean, I've done a science degree, I know my bits, I've done a few conservation jobs, but I definitely wing it. And I feel like I think it was Pete that said earlier, anyone can be a conservationist if you just give them the confidence to do it and just to have a go. So yeah, I just wanted to add that bit there, that I really think it's the experience that you give people, giving them somewhere to go, having them experiencing being outdoors, being part of something, rather than interpretation boards only go as part of the way.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I'll go to you, Nick, next. But just to say, Hannah, I had exactly the same thing on my project. I think a lot of my volunteers, they actually kept coming back because they made friends with each other. They did like what we were doing, but it was the friendships, I think, that also kept them coming back. And I've seen that on other conservation groups. So yeah, Nick, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that and just say, I think that we need to realize that not everyone is going to want to, be an expert on a certain group of species, and everyone's want to go out and be a naturalist. I think it's about, similar to what Jamie was saying about getting people active, it's just about getting people outdoors, and then however they interact with nature and the natural world is sort of up to them. If they want to go out mountain biking or they want to do whatever outside, as long as they're outside when they're doing it and they're in a kind of a natural space of some description, I think that's pretty much, that's at least a start. And I think it's a bit of a win, really, because at least they're going to value that space.
Yeah, and Jamie, you wanted to say something?
It's interesting. So Hannah and Nick, you kind of just touched on, I don't know if you've heard of, there's a theory called self-determination theory. And it basically says, if you want people to be motivated to do something, they need to be autonomous, which is exactly what you just mentioned, Nick. They need to find their own way of engaging with things. Hannah, you mentioned friendships and relationships, and that's the other thing, that's two, relatedness. And the third thing is competence. And I think sometimes that's the thing that we struggle with the most, is how are you going to show these people in typically their brief interaction with you guys, how they've become more competent at something that's of value to them, and if you can give them a skill or show them that they've learned something of importance. And if you can hit those three things, I mean, if you see the Sport England survey and you ask adults, why do you do sport? 65% of them said, because my mates do. So making relationships, gaining in competence, and then feeling like you've got some sort of interest or input in your own destiny. They're really the three key things if you're going to get behaviour change to happen. And the last thing I would add to that is that only really works in bite-sized chunks. So you can't expect somebody to go from not being interested in conservation to becoming a conservationist. It's how we compress that so we can show them where the step is. So it's a bit like me. We did Veganuary and we're kind of doing okay with it. But to me, it's not about suddenly becoming a vegan. It's about becoming incrementally more vegan. So perhaps we need to work out how people can become incrementally more conservation. I don't know what the word is there. And the one example I thought of, I don't know where it is, but Cara was working with Steve and people like that to try and come small scale rewilding and how that could potentially be mapped and how you could do one thing in your garden that would make a difference. But actually, if you could map it and you could realize that your village, for instance, Hannah, if several people all did the same thing in their garden and maybe you've got a wildlife stepping stone corridor, then that's something that you can give back to them and say, well done, this is what you've achieved. So it's about completing that circle as well.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true as well. What you just said, Damien, about it being small steps, and almost you want that gateway activity that hooks someone, and then trying to keep them and helping them on that journey and moving through. Hannah?
On the bit about giving people confidence, I think it's a relevant point to bring up that I think the world of conservation and ecology is generally quite intimidating if you're an enthusiast, but you don't know what SSSI means and you don't know the species, and it can be quite a difficult world to break into. Conservationists don't mean it, we just happen to use certain terms or just say things that, oh well, obviously everybody knows this, but actually people don't. And I've only been doing conservation for nearly 2 years, so I'm still finding my feet, but I've just kind of got used to the fact that there's a lot I don't know. So definitely boosting people's confidence is really, really, really important. In my wildlife group, people default to me all the time to ask me questions. Oh, is this right? Is this right? And they're totally right every single time, but they just need that reassurance that, you know, building a hedgehog house is done this way or something. And they're totally right every single time. So if you want a community conservation project to have a legacy, you're totally correct in that you need to give people the confidence that they can go out and do things, and they've got the common sense to do it. So yeah, and it's really rewarding when it happens as well.
Yeah, and another point on confidence is that the work on the project I just did was working in some of our national parks, so Exmoor and Dartmoor and Bodmin Moor, and you know they're quite big upland areas that can, in the same sense that you just mentioned, Hannah, be intimidating for groups of people that don't quite know what to do in the countryside. They won't know where to park, they wouldn't know where to walk. And so some of our work was bringing groups from places like Taunton or Exeter, near these national parks, out to visit them with people like myself or my colleague or others who know the landscape and can, you know, take them on the right footpath to see certain wildlife and give them that confidence and help them to sort of have that gateway into those landscapes. Because and the national parks, they do know this, that and they're trying to start to do some work on it, and there's been some projects in those national parks, and I'm sure there have been in others around the country, where they're trying to reach out to some of the more disadvantaged groups in those urban areas that are normally on the edges of those parks, because they're aware that the people that normally go to them are the people who are more wealthy, and as James said, they're probably white and middle class, who can drive. They already are maybe walkers for wildlife people, and they know how to access that landscape, if you see what I mean. Whereas a lot of people in urban areas probably just they don't have a clue what to really do or where to go. And I think that barrier is something that is quite real and is something that needs to be worked on, because those parks are set up, they're supposed to be for the nation, they're supposed to be for everybody, and they can deliver a huge amount, but it's they're probably not delivering as much as they could necessarily. But that's also why I think, linking to something Jamie might have said earlier, we need to improve green space in urban areas as well. And we've seen that being talked about in the light of the lockdown at the moment, whereby you've seen how important those green spaces are for people and how much they need them for their daily exercise, and to just get out of the house and de-stress. And that might be something that might change going forward as people have seen how important they are. Anyone else got any thoughts they want to contribute on anything to do with engagement? We've kind of covered a lot of the points I put in the agenda anyway. I wondered if, I don't know if Steph or Alex, as two younger people here, probably younger than all of us, if you wanted to say anything about engagement from your perspective, or what the conservation sector might do better or more of.
Something I was just thinking of, and I guess I don't know to use it, but it kind of relates to, I guess, the younger generation, is that there are a lot more kind of citizen science like apps going around and being created now. And kind of one of the things, as I was just thinking about that, was that I think one of the things that got people outside loads recently was like, the whole like Pokemon Go app or something like that. Like, it's not related to like conservation at all, really. But I think when that was a big craze, that got so many people who usually would sit inside playing computer games or just video games and not get outside. That was like one of the things that actually got people out walking and physically kind of, maybe it was just exploring their little road or whatever. But it just suddenly got me thinking, like, maybe in the future kind of getting like linking up with like gaming apps and stuff to try and get like we were saying, engaging those people who don't even step outside the door, but kind of using those platforms to just get people walking outside. I don't know. I don't know much about the conservation citizen science bit, but yeah. Yeah,
no, I noticed that, and there is someone, Pete or Elliot might be able to remember, Danielle. Yeah, please.
Yeah, Pocket Pals, Danielle Connor's thing.
Yeah, so she's, I don't know, been using that to try and design an app similar principle to Pokemon Go, but using it for British native wildlife. And I think it might have some education aspects as well. Someone put their hand up then. Was it you, Jamie?
I've seen a few, because I remember thinking exactly the same as you, Steph, when that came out, and kind of, I don't know, I was also speaking to a guy called Darry Morris, who said they do something like journey sticks, and you could almost make a virtual journey stick. And I think we've got to a place as a society now where it's not conservation's over here and technology's over here. I think we're beginning to see, well, we are seeing the huge benefits of apps, and it's not so much that screens are keeping people indoors. Inevitably, screens can also take you outdoors. But if you can, I think being outside for the first time or the first few times may be quite intimidating, as I think it was Hannah that said. But if you let them do it on their own terms, which is through a 4x6 meter screen, then they're more likely to do it. And if you took them to an oak tree, they could put a GPS marker down and they, okay, this is this moth that lives on this, and this is this. And then when you go back, you could capture those GPS, and they could have their own little virtual journey stick that they can see on a GPS map. You need far more clever people. I think somebody at University of Tasmania had a go at that too, but you potentially got the right enough people who know enough about, like, so Steve Carver would be a great person, but also there's enough people who know about this, but potentially the only people I know that are looking at it is a collaboration for sort of learning outdoors and stuff like that, which is more Plymouth and Exeter based. But I think it won't be long in coming, but I can't say what form it will take.
Yeah, I just had a quick thing. My only worry with that is that Pokemon Go, obviously, it was very popular, and then it declined a lot in popularity, as a lot of these things do, because it became a craze. And the two worries that I have is, one, that if you had some sort of nature-based app, could it just become a craze and then go again? And also, in a way, I know we've got to engage with people on their terms, as you said, Jamie and Steph, in terms of technology. But one of the things we might be wanting to try and do is get people away from looking at their screens. And I wasn't sure if linking it back to screens again would create more problems. I don't know. I know, Elliot, you want to say something as well. If anyone wants to tell me whether I'm right or wrong on that. Anyone want to go? Elliot, go on then.
Yeah, well, I think it's definitely a danger. One thing, the whole Pokemon Go thing really interested me as well, but maybe from a slightly different perspective. Because I think when I was a child, Pokemon was like, I was like 6 or 7. I absolutely loved Pokemon. I collected the cards. I think Pokemon is actually something that inspired my love of nature in a weird sense, because all that Pokemon were based on animals, and like I love pangolins, and that's basically Sandshrew, and I was like, oh, so that gateway of like Pokemon was somehow my sort of basic introduction to nature. So it's like, so what is it about Pokemon that managed to engender this sort of global response that got people outside? Maybe it wasn't just the app, we already had that huge following, but Pokemon in my mind is sort of based on the natural world anyway. So could we take it a step back and see that we've got these incredible natural wonders that are on our doorsteps, from like dragonflies to whatever, and sort of market them in a way that makes them as exciting as Pokemon, because actually they're probably more exciting than Pokemon anyway, and use that as a motivation to get them out. And it's just how we sort of convey the natural world around us, I think, is a very important thing. It's not just for old recording societies of old men who just love, doing stuff, but really making it exciting. I think making nature a bit more Pokemon could be quite an interesting thing.
Yeah, no, I do agree. Pete?
I think just following from Elliot's last point there about who nature is for, I think that's also a big turn off for a lot of people who might potentially be interested. I mean, I've done quite a few talks to sort of wildlife trust groups, these local groups that are predominantly attended by people over the age of 60. And I'll often get the question, how do we get more young people coming along to these things? How do we get more young people engaged? And you want to go and talk about how all the disconnection from nature that we've seen and loss of childhood, et cetera, et cetera. But the simple reality is, if you're 18, the idea of spending your evening with a bunch of over 60s in a village hall just doesn't really sound that appealing. Even the material is quite fascinating, what you're learning about. And I think the framing of how the fact nature is for everyone, and it isn't just for primary school age children or retired people, needs to really have it in there. But I think, unfortunately, a lot of the marketing of the NGOs seems to be at primary school children or post-retirees. And the bracket who actually, potentially with the emphasis to actually do something in policy and other sort of big parts of their lives are kind of ignored. Especially teenagers. I mean, that's a big problem in its own right. And, the fact that nature seems uncool once it gets to teenage age is a massive problem. Yeah,
and that's obviously where Focus on Nature came in, and I think it did a lot of good things there, and hopefully still is. I'm not in touch with it anymore. Hannah?
Just to add to that, totally agree, but something about climate change is really appealing to teenagers. So it's like wildlife and nature tots and all those fun things happen when you're young, and then there's a gap where you stop caring about that and you suddenly become really, really interested in the climate and plastic and greenhouse gases and nagging your parents to stop driving and all these kind of things. And then I feel like later on in life, people start looking at birds and going, oh, that's interesting. So something about climate change, which is capturing the interest of young people in a way that wildlife and biodiversity is missing out on. And it's something that I think about quite a lot. And it's something that I thought about when I set up Heal Future, our youth network. It's like, okay, so what is climate? What are the climate change movement doing that we're not doing? And I think it could be to do with how complicated our messages are. So climate change, I feel, it can be simplified. It can be less carbon out, more carbon in, simple kind of changes you can make, cycling, that kind of stuff. The message isn't too complicated, but when it comes to biodiversity and species, you get a lot of people who are real specialists in each kind of species and each habitat. There are different ways to manage each habitat. All these different things, I feel like they're quite confusing for young people, and that's why it kind of turns them off. And then also I think that climate change as a movement is seen as quite technology based and quite progressive, and it's kind of like that some scientists in the future might come up with some kind of technology that's going to save us all by figuring out how to capture carbon or figuring out how to clean plastic out of the ocean, whereas there isn't that same technology-based hope for biodiversity. So I think it's kind of, biodiversity is a little bit less sexy when it comes to that idea. It's not so simple, there's not such quick wins, and yeah, as you said as well, people don't want to sit in halls on a Friday night with people learning about dragonflies and whether it has this marking or this marking. They want to see kind of big picture change and hope for a better future, and I think that's what the climate change movement gives younger people. So we need to learn from it, basically.
That's a brilliant point. I'd forgotten about that, and you're completely right. And I'll go to you next, Nick, because you can. I also wondered whether part of the climate change movement is they've managed to get some young people like Greta, and there's some other young teenagers in America who are really great role models and kind of broken through and are quite well known now. And that's, I think, helping galvanise a lot. But I've noticed that it's amazing the amount of young people so involved in that, the climate change movement. Nick, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that Hannah said, and I think those are definitely some issues we face in trying to kind of get that same energy. But I think it's just been, we haven't been unlucky, because I guess that protest movement focusing on climate change is a really good thing. But I think, you know, every now and again you kind of get these waves of youth energy protesting a certain thing, you know, whether it's the Iraq war or kind of the student finance stuff. And I think it can be potentially just be chance. So it could be, you know, just because Greta Thunberg kind of emerged, or like Simon was saying, these kind of young people in America, and it's just kind of caught that energy, climate change. And because that's happening, it's sort of expanded and maybe pushed out some of the focus on these other environmental issues. So I think you're right in the technology and those kind of things definitely play a factor, but it could have just been a bit of luck, really, that's become the issue that young people are focusing on in their protests at the minute, and not on the kind of biodiversity front.
Yeah, although I definitely think there's been a change. I think Hannah's right, there's more young people are coming on board than there maybe has been. I mean, I've only been working in conservation 10 years, but definitely with the climate change movement and the Extinction Rebellion seems to capture more young people. I wonder whether it's to do with the messaging, as Hannah was saying. It's almost, the messaging is quite radical as well, and I think that radical element of it is quite appealing to young people in a way, who may be more likely to sort of protest against things in a way. I don't know what you think to that, Steph, if you've had any thoughts on why those things might be more appealing.
I'm not 100%. I think when it comes to Extinction Rebellion, I think probably a large aspect, particularly before the lockdown when things were kind of really like reaching a bit of a storm, I think the rebel aspect was probably quite appealing to some of the younger, like, you know, like teens and stuff like that. I think because that often is a bit of a rebellious period in your life. So I think if there is a big movement of it, and like, then it's something kind of easy to get involved in. So in some senses, maybe some almost got involved for slightly the wrong reasons, but then at the same time, it kind of, that, you know, maybe it's not great they got involved just because they wanted to rebel, but at the same time, it's still voicing a loud message and people are finding out about it more. It's still, spreading the word a bit. So, not exactly sure what was underpinning it all though.
Cool, no, thank you. Does anyone else have anything they want to raise or contribute? No? Well, that's fine. We've only got 10 minutes left. If anyone wants to say any final bits and pieces, or we'll just, Andrew, yeah. You're mute there.
Yeah, I'm just going to say one last thing, really, that the next sort of years I think are really exciting in policy changes in agriculture, and I think it's still time to sort of map how the new system can look, and I just really, I think this is all great, and I've got a baby over me, but I think it's really exciting. I think it's really good what you're all doing, and I think the future's. I think it's going to be really exciting. So yeah, thanks for this. But I think it hasn't been decided how it's going to look, and I think access and conservation are going to be. It's going to be a big part of new payments, and sadly, well, not sadly, but finances are a big driver in the agricultural world, and that, you know, think how much agricultural land there is, and so keep going. Yeah, thanks very much. That's all I've got to say. Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you for joining. It's really, I really appreciate it. In my previous job, I worked with farmers, and it's great to get more farmers if we can on these types of calls, because I think we all should be working much more closely together and talking more. So I really appreciate you joining, and I hope it was useful for you in some way. But if you have any other people within the farming world that you know and want to point them in this direction, then yeah, please do. If anyone has anything else to say, now's the time, or if not, no. Okay, well, I'll just say thank you to you all then for coming. I've enjoyed it, and I think this one has recorded successfully, so I'll be able to share it on YouTube and let you know the link in due course. My furlough ends next week, so I'm going back to work. For how long, who knows? But which is good. But I'm happy to keep these going because I've really enjoyed them. If you're all happy to keep joining them, I'll carry on doing them because I think it's quite good to talk about things. So I'll send you out an email again, as I've done before, to organise one for maybe next week. They might have to be at different times for the weekends, but we'll work that out. But yeah, thank you all for joining again. Nice to see you all. Yeah. Goodbye.
Cheers, Simon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simon.
Thanks,
Bye.
Simon. That's great. Thanks,
Cheers.
everyone.
Bye-bye.